Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kiran Pasricha, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to a special session today under our Ambassador series. It's a platform for interaction with heads of foreign missions in India and Indian missions abroad. We are truly delighted to have with us His Excellency Mr. Ugo Astuto, Ambassador of the European Union to India, today to share his vision on ambition and action in the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss, the need for multilateralism. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Ambassador. We are very glad to be hosting this session today on India-European Union vision towards climate action. In a few weeks, we will be hosting our first ever Track 2 dialogue with the EU, and climate, of course, will be a priority of discussion there as well. We hope to build on the key takeaways from today's conversation in our upcoming Track 2 and beyond. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. His Excellency, Mr. Astuto, has been the ambassador of the European Union to India since October 2019. We just haven't seen enough of him, thanks to COVID, but so glad to have you here with us today. He entered the Italian, I would love for that to be Indian as well. He entered the Italian diplomatic service in 1991. His career in the Italian Foreign Service spans experience in the embassies in Nairobi and London, including as alternate director for Italy in the EBRD, in the permanent mission in Brussels, and in the embassy in Delhi, where he served as the deputy head of mission. From February 2013 until July 2016, he was seconded to the European External Action Service in Brussels, first as director for South and Southeast Asia, and then as Deputy Managing Director and Director for Asia and the Pacific. From July 16 to September 19, he was the Principal Director for Asia in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome. I'm also delighted to welcome Mr. Jamshed Godrej, Chairman Ananta Center and Chairman of the Board of Godrej & Boyce Manufacturing Company Limited. Mr. Godrej graduated in mechanical engineering from Illinois Institute of Technology, USA. He is the chairperson of the board of directors of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, Indian Resources Trust, and the Council of Energy, Environment, and Water. Mr. Godrej is a director of the World Resources Institute, USA, a trustee of the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, India, and also a trustee of the Asia Society, USA. Mr. Godrej has served as the past president of the Confederation of Indian Industry and also of the Indian Machine Tool Manufacturers Association. Mr. Godrej is very passionate about climate issues and heads Ananta Center's Track 2 climate dialogues with the US and the UK. Mr. Godrej, I'm so glad that you're chairing this important session today. It is always a pleasure to have you with us. I'm really looking forward to an insightful discussion. And with that, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiran, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this very important session with His Excellency, Mr. Ugo Astuto. Your Excellency, it is a real pleasure to have you with us today. The timing and theme of the session is especially relevant given that COP26 is less than a week away. The India-European Union relations date back to the early 60s, and India was amongst the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with what was then known, of course, as the European Economic Community. On the climate front, which is the theme of today's discussion, India and the European Union have a great partnership and are looking to enhance it further. The EU and India are the third and fourth largest carbon emitters in the world, respectively, and have a huge responsibility and role to play in our efforts about climate change. And it is absolutely crucial for us to work together and to be able to tackle this crisis. We are, of course, making some progress. As we all know, the European Union has a target of net zero emissions by 2050. But what is more important, of course, is that they also have a target, an intermediate target for 2030. India does not as yet have a net zero plan, but we do have very ambitious renewable energy targets. And we wish to achieve 450 gigawatts by 2030. India also has a very ambitious national cooling action plan, which also aims to improve efficiency in cooling and improve the types of refrigerants and emissions from refrigerants, which are very potent greenhouse gases. India is also likely, of course, to update its nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement at the upcoming Glasgow Conference of Parties. Our Prime Minister will be attending the G20 in Italy, and from there he will be going to Glasgow for the COP26. And we do expect and hope for a very ambitious outcome. In terms of our partnership with the European Union on climate change and clean energy, this is a very important strategic partnership, and there has been a roadmap laid out for that purpose. There is also significant cooperation between the European Union and India on clean energy and a climate partnership, which is, of course, talking about energy efficiency, renewable energy, smart grids, storage technology, and modernization of our electricity grids. So India and the European Union already are very closely working together on climate. I do feel that we are doing much together, but there is always scope for us to do more together. We also need others to come together and work with us so that all stakeholders in this process can work towards a multilateral good outcome for the COP26. So Ambassador Astuto, we look forward to hearing your views on these very urgent and topical themes. And we will begin our session with brief remarks from the Ambassador. This would be followed by a conversation that I would have with him, and then question and answers from the audience. Just a note for instructions for our audience. Please send in your questions throughout the session and do not wait until the end. We will be taking up your questions during the Q&A session. And if you're watching this session on Zoom, please use the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, please write your questions in the comments section. Ambassador, this is my pleasure to invite you to address us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Godrej, and thank you, Madam. Thank you, Mrs. Pastriscia, and thank you to the Ananta Center for inviting me at this event. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. As you said, Mr. Godrej, it is a very topical issue considering that only a few days separate us from Glasgow. And not so long ago, a few weeks only, we have read the latest IPCC report. A report which has been very clear, unfortunately, in its conclusions. For the planet, we need to be ambitious, and we need to take action now because we do not have any longer the luxury of time. There is no way that we can simply procrastinate. And in order to achieve our objectives, in order to implement the objectives set in Paris, we do indeed need multilateralism. No individual country can make it on its own. We must work together. We must work together towards a recovery from the pandemic, which is green and resilient. And we need to take bold decisions now in order to achieve this objective. It's a huge challenge. There is no point in hiding it, but we have to raise up to this challenge and fundamentally change the paradigm of our economic models. It's difficult, but it can be done. So the whole world, we will look at what will happen in COP26. It's clear that we need to decarbonize our economies, and we need to do that fast. If you look at the recent events, what has happened with only a 1.1 degree increase in world temperature, well, we have seen extreme weather events, be it in Europe or very recently in India and elsewhere. We have seen harvests going wrong, wildfires, tornadoes. So it's clear that we cannot afford even higher levels of global warming in the years to come. So we need to change our ways. Otherwise, humanity will face much harsher conditions. And the next generation will not forgive us for our inaction. Starting from this proposition, the European Union has developed what we call this Green Deal. It's now our guide, both in our internal and our domestic policies, but also in our external projections. So the policy set in place within the framework of the Green Deal aim at setting our infrastructure, agriculture, industry on the path towards greener solutions. We do not believe that we have to face a trade-off between economic growth and the environment. The recent records of growth in Europe do not sustain this conclusion. We are of the opinion that sustainability-driven investments are actually a source of growth and jobs. And the source of growth and jobs that will last, that is durable, while investment into high emission industries and environmentally harmful activities will only lead to more environmental degradation, to higher costs, and in the end, stranded economic assets. So we have set in place a recovery package to face the fallout of COVID, which we have called Next Generation EU. And this package is underpinned by this new paradigm. It's our growth strategy. We want to overcome the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation, and we want to transform the European Union. We want to make it a resource efficient, modern, competitive economy. So the European Green Deal provides a roadmap with very, very clear and specific actions to move to a climate neutral European continent by 2050. Actions that include the massive renovation of infrastructure, the rolling out of renewable energy, including clean hydrogen, cleaner transport and logistics, including electric vehicles, and strengthening the Just Transition Fund, which will be set up to support the reskilling, because no one must be left behind. But please, mark my words, these are not just generic aspirations, because all this is now enshrined into the EU climate law, into legal provisions. So, and this legal provision will discipline us in the years to come. And the objective set in law is the reduction of at least 55% of our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So we need to do everything we can to mitigate climate change, be it domestically or internationally. But at the same time, we must also be ready to adapt to the consequences of climate change, which are already unavoidable, and we see them day in, day out. So the EU strategy on adaptation to climate change aims at building a climate resilient society, to step up adaptation planning, the availability of state-of-the-art climate risk assessments, and helping to strengthen climate resilience more broadly. So in one word, mitigation and adaptation are two sides of the same coin. The European Union clearly acknowledges the specific needs and special circumstances of developing countries. and particularly of least developed countries and small island developing states. Well, these LDCs and SIDS are specifically vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change. We just need to think about Pacific Islands. Therefore, the European Union has decided to increase its support to international climate resilience and preparedness, including through the scaling up of international finance. And we are absolutely cognizant of the fact that climate finance is key. It's key to drive the shift to a climate neutral and climate resilient global economy and global society. And that is why the European Union, its member states, are the world's leading climate change and biodiversity laws are reciprocally connected. And we need to set up strategies that address both challenges. Nature-based solutions, these help to fight biodiversity loss, but also climate change, and to protect and restore nature. Unfortunately, over 75% of the Earth is already degraded due to the pressure we all as humans put on land. Fighting land degradation is a must if we want to ensure food security, to protect the livelihood of millions of people, as well as guarantee a livable planet to humanity and to the next generation. Land degradation affects the entire world. In the European Union, we are taking action with a biodiversity and farm-to-fork strategies. We intend to make nature restoration legally binding. We want to plant 3 billion trees by 2030. We want to stimulate deforestation-free supply chains and reduce the use of harmful pesticides. Overall, we want to protect 30% of Europe's land and sea. And we would like to reach the 30% rate of protection globally as well. As we work to build back from the current COVID pandemic, we must look forward and we must look down, I would say. So we have to keep in mind that the ground we walk in is what keeps us walking at all. There is no replacement for that. Adopting a biodiversity strategy is actually also an opportunity, again, for growth and jobs, and for our economies to prosper in a sustainable fashion. So the biodiversity strategy is essential for boosting our resilience and also for preventing the emergence of future diseases such as zoonoses. We have evidence that viruses such as COVID find favorable conditions for their diffusion in biodiversity loss. So the experience of COVID should also act as a spur for all of us to act. Destroying nature at an unprecedented rate, having around 1 million species now at risk of extinction within decades, well, that's a risk. That's a menace for our own life, for our health and our well-being. As a climate and biodiversity crises are interconnected, stopping biodiversity loss, stepping up our efforts to stop biodiversity loss, that's a precondition also for reaching climate neutrality. And let's remind you that it's also an economic imperative because about half of the world's GDP is linked to nature. So the business case for biodiversity is also compelling. Industry and companies rely on genes, on species, and on ecosystem services as critical inputs for their production. including for the medicines that are so necessary also in this pandemic. So what can we do, and what can the EU and India do in this respect? Well, I'm glad to recall that at the EU-India summit in July 2020, and then at the recent leaders meeting in Porto in last May, the EU and India have confirmed their commitment to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we have reaffirmed our intention to cooperate under a number of partnerships that we have in place. For instance, the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, the Water Partnership, and the Smart and Sustainable Urbanization Partnership. And the EU has also joined the two flagship initiatives launched by India. We are engaging with the International Solar Alliance. The Vice President of the European Commission, Vice President competent for the Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, participated last Wednesday at the opening of the ISA Assembly. And he announced our intention to launch a project for around €1 million, funded by the EU, which aims at further strengthening the engagement of the EU, its member states, the European academic, business, and financial communities with the International Solar Alliance. The European Union has also joined the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure to ensure that infrastructure is more resilient to climate change, that we can contribute to adaptation, notably in small island developing states. And let me note that during his visit, Vice President Timmermans discussed with a number of Indian interlocutors at ministerial level, but also stakeholders, how to make COP26 and COP15 a success, and how we can strengthen our collaboration. And I think discussions were very good and centered on concrete action. What can we do next to offer our contribution? The Vice President was hugely impressed by India's commitment to have 450 gigawatts of renewable energy production by 2030. But let me come to a conclusion here by saying that the European Union and India together can offer a significant contribution in shaping the international agenda in the pursuit of global common goods. In the area of climate change, but also biodiversity, India will be a key player. It's essential that we work together for the success of COP26. I think we share the same beliefs that in the area of climate, as in many others, there is no alternative to effective multilateralism. And the EU and India, I think, are ideally placed to steer the discussion in such form. We have to do this. We have to do this in our own interest, but also in the interest of all countries and all people, and in the interest of the next generations of children and grandchildren. And we have to do it now. We cannot simply postpone and wait and see, because the urgency is now before our eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that very comprehensive discussion on all the different aspects of climate and biodiversity and what the European Union is doing. I must say that the European Union has been very consistent in terms of action with respect to climate change over a long period of time. And I think we are seeing many benefits from that in the European Union. And I think the partnership with India will be very, very good and useful and a very close one, as you have mentioned. There is one aspect, of course, of the European Union, which is of some concern, not a great concern, but the fact is that you have countries which are highly developed and others which are on their way to being highly developed. And how do you perceive this difficulty or challenge within the European Union when it comes to joint action? Do you think you could be more ambitious than you have already stated?
Well, I think we are ready to walk the talk. And I think in particular, the climate law is evidence of that. This law is also the product of an extensive discussion among member states and between member states and the Commission. That's how decisions are taken in the European Union. So the procedure may be long, but what it leads to is to a decision which is common to all. So this objective we have defined, including the one for 2030, of a 55% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, it's an EU objective shared by all at 27. But we should not hide the fact that it's going to be difficult. There certainly are challenges. And for some countries more than for others. Let's say some countries, for instance, are more dependent even today on coal, while others are far more advanced in their energy mix towards renewables. That is why we also act under the principle behind, and that's why we are setting up facilities, funds that should help the transition. But based on our estimates, I mean, the jobs lost, for instance, in the coal sector, are only a fraction of the jobs that will be created by fostering the renewable energy industry. So the point is how to accompany the transition in order to avoid that some people, those people are employed in fossil fuel sectors, do suffer in the short term. So we need to act also in that respect to offer a cushion in the transition. But we hold the deep conviction that the green transition is also an economic opportunity, that we can make a good business case for shifting to renewables. And that if we manage to mitigate the harm in some specific section and some specific regions, then we can, in the medium to long term, bring benefits to all.
And Europe has been a leader in nuclear energy. I think we know that at least in France, there is a very high percentage. I know that there was a small setback in Germany when they decided to go back on nuclear energy. Do you include nuclear energy as renewable energy within the European Union? Is that the way your law is laid out?
Well, look, in some individual member states, nuclear energy is very much part of the energy mix. And obviously in our road towards renewables, we also need to look at the transition. What can we do? Nuclear energy, gas, we need to look at a mix of solutions. I don't think there is a single silver bullet. Right? While we plan for the future and we look at cost-effective alternatives to fossil fuels, we explore green hydrogen, for instance. We also need to make do with what we have today.
Yeah. Now, as you have rightly said, that the IPCC report has clearly indicated and documented the issue that if we do not act jointly and severally together, that we can expect significant climate changes to take place before the end of this century. And clearly, this is laid out that the world should come together on a net zero effect. Now, we know that some countries are going to move faster than others. Some regions are going to move faster than others. And we know that, India has to step up, mainly because we are the third or fourth largest, between the European Union and India, we're third and fourth after China and the US. My concern is that if some of the bigger countries and the bigger emitters do not step up, for instance, like India and China, what will be the challenge for us to be able to achieve this target of net zero by 2050? And if we do not achieve it by 2050, the IPCC report has laid out consequences. But what I really like about your plan and your law is that you have clearly put intermediate target of 2030 at 55% reduction. How should we get this idea of strong intermediate targets more deeper into the country's planning and thinking? And because, as you rightly said, it is very much an economic growth opportunity also, and all countries are looking for economic growth. How should we move this idea of having stronger intermediate targets and not just saying that we will achieve something 30 years from now?
Well, look, I can talk about our own experience, and then we have set the target for 2050 climate to make Europe a climate neutral continent. But then the question arises: but how do you do that? It's far from an easy target to reach. So that's why we have started to look at the detail, at the nitty-gritty, and we have established this intermediate objective by 2030. This reduction of emissions by 55% when compared to the 1990 baseline. And these intermediate targets comes with a series of specific actions to be taken in a number of sectors. We need to rethink, basically, all our strategies for growth. And we, in a way, I mean, we have to intervene in the very fabric of our economies and societies. So that's why we have also targets, for instance, when it comes to transport. Transport is a big source of emissions. And we need to boost electric vehicles, for instance. So there again, a target has been set for the phasing out of fossil fuels vehicles. And this is actually helping industry, because the automotive industry is now has a clear target to adapt to, and a time frame for investment. Let's pick another example, the building industry and infrastructure industry, which is another source, a considerable source of emissions. So the adoption of new standards, green standards, it's something that the industry sorely needs, because they now have rules, not just principles, but also rules driving the industry into the future decades. So in our experience, the setting up of this intermediate target and the clear indication of the policies to pursue and enshrining these policies into law has been an extremely productive endeavor. And I trust this will prove essential for the European Union to reach its target and be successful in the pursuit of lower emission and the green, digital, and resilient economy.
Yes. Ambassador, for a country like India, I think there are two big challenges that we face. One, of course, is to have great ambition, just the way that the European Union has laid out. The other big challenge, of course, is that we need the rest of the world to work with us to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency and all the other actions, as you mentioned, especially on electric vehicles and improvement in energy efficiency, etc. Now, both these will require significant amounts of finance. They will require new products, new technologies, etc. What do you see the European Union doing in terms of being an investor in India and investing in all these technologies and bringing in their technology at the same time.
Yes, well, I think it's that's entirely correct in the sense that the issue of finance is spot on, obviously. That also includes India, but more broadly. A large section of the world is in need of finance to support the transition. And industrialized countries obviously also have to fulfill the pledge about the $100 billion of finance to transfer to the south of the world, pledge which was made in Paris. And I think the European Union has been fully committed and actually already provides more than its share, let's say, in purely arithmetic terms. So the commitment, again, is not just theory, but practice. In parallel with that, the sharing of technology is also important. And with partners like India, I think we already have a number of joint endeavors that help also in bringing to India our best practice, and vice versa. I mentioned in my initial address the climate and energy partnership, the water partnership, the sustainable urbanization partnership. Well, through this joint initiative, we also have a constant stream, let's say, of experiences being shared and of small and medium enterprises coming together and exchanging views on how best to achieve the green transition. So also when it comes to the new horizons, let's say, of technology such as hydrogen, I mean, we have noted with great interest the hydrogen mission launched on Independence Day. And I think Europe today has a lead in hydrogen technology. I think our leaders have also expressed a wish to come together and set up some sort of forum or meeting where we can discuss on the future of green hydrogen. I think also in this respect, besides the imperative dictated by climate change, we also see economic opportunities. When we discuss about the security of supply chains, well, obviously it's also an interest for Europe and India that these green technologies are developed and are exchanged. And let's look, I don't know, at the steel sector, for instance, where India is a key player. And where India has also important investments in Europe. Well, if Indian entrepreneur were to adopt new technology and produce hydrogen fuel steel, well, that would be fantastic from the environmental point of view, and would also provide a clearly competitive edge to the Indian steel industry worldwide. So I think there is definitely space for India and the EU to come together and discuss how best to work towards our common objectives in reducing emissions and mainstreaming new technology, particularly when it comes to energy, but also beyond.
Yeah. Yes, Ambassador. You know, I strongly believe that this transition has to be led by the private sector on both sides, in India and the European Union. And it may be unrealistic to expect, government to government finance flows to a very large extent, because even though the pledge in Paris was 100 billion, actually we need trillions of dollars to effect this type of massive change, not just in India, but in all parts of the world. And there is a huge amount of finance that is globally available today for good projects. And I would look to the European Union companies and Indian companies, working together and making this happen. You mentioned green steel, for instance, made from green hydrogen. I mean, that's a huge opportunity. Of course, there is cement, there is, there are petrochemicals, there are other chemical industries. So I would hope that there would be massive investment taking place between India and the European Union on all these green projects, dipping into the enormous global flows of finance that are available today. What is your view on that?
Well, I definitely agree. I mean, the need for finance will not be filled by public finance alone. The private sector needs to do its part. But in order for the private sector to come in, what we need are clear government policies. We need objective sets and the right incentives in place. That's where this target setting becomes so important. I was mentioning earlier. I mean, in the European Union, this 2030 target of 55% reduction will be seminal, I believe, also in steering the action of the private sector towards the green transition. It's no longer something which can be postponed until a vague future. Right? Where the industry needs to plan for this decade and set investment accordingly. So governments have a role to play, setting targets, indicating the road ahead, and then the private sector can come in, particularly for India and the EU, market-based economies and open societies where the public discussion also shapes investment beside obviously government regulation.
My hope is that this partnership between the European Union and India on clean energy and climate partnership should get deeper into this area and really come up with the right policies and incentives that can benefit both our regions significantly. I think that would be a good forum for bringing this about. I do hope that, that on the trade front also, I know that there have been voices in Europe and in other parts of the world talking about, some sort of a green tax or a barrier if countries and regions do not, move rapidly in this area. Do you think the European Union's policy in this respect can be beneficial for both our regions?
Yes, well, first on trade, if I may, as you know, our leaders decided to relaunch negotiation on an FTA, on a free trade agreement. And there will be a sustainability chapter. So it's my hope that that will also contribute, let's say, to a meeting of minds between India and the EU as to the way ahead and the greening of the economy. As to other measures you mentioned, well, look, what we need collectively to address is a risk of carbon leakage. I mean, if one region of the world intervenes and reduces carbon emissions, but another region of the world increases without control, then the net result is not conducive to emission reductions. So we need to implement measures that address the risk of carbon leakage, and that we need an approach, obviously, which is proportionate and fair and in line with WTO. But the issue is there, and it needs to be addressed.
I have a question from the audience, and in some ways it refers to what you have already mentioned. The question is that, the Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs from India, Nirmala Sitharaman, met with Mr. Timmermans, Executive Vice President of the European Commission, where she invited the EU to tie up with India on green hydrogen to harness natural synergies in this area between the two sides. How best should we go about developing this thought on investment in green hydrogen? this seems to be a very important and topical issue right now.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, during the meetings of the Vice President, the issue of green hydrogen has come up repeatedly. So it's clear demonstration of the fact there is an interest on both sides. It's the next horizon. We need to develop cost-effective alternatives to fossil fuels. And this is going to be a mix of solutions. Hydrogen is likely to be an important part of it. That's why the Executive Vice President responded positively also to this invitation. And we shall be working together about establishing some sort of platform where we can discuss about respective experiences and possibly plan ahead. See what we can do, how we can benefit mutually from the experience gained, and we can share some best practice. So I expect green hydrogen to play a significant role in the conversation between the EU and India in the coming months about the green transition.
Yes, I did read that there is a mill, I think in Sweden, a steel mill in Sweden, which produced the first green steel from green hydrogen just a few months ago. How extensive is the use, of the expected use of green hydrogen in the European Union for steel, for cement, and for other process industries? Do you see the European Union also having very ambitious targets on that? So, Ambassador, can you hear me?
I'm back. Yes, but I lost your last.
Yeah. No, my
couple of sentences.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I do. Please go ahead.
Yes. No, my question was that what plans does Europe have for the use of green hydrogen in the process industries like steel, cement, fertilizer, chemicals, etc.?
On now, so let's see if it works better. Please.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Sorry about the connectivity, but no, my question was, what plans are there in the European Union for the greater use of green hydrogen in the economy in Europe for the process industries like steel, cement, fertilizer, chemicals, etc.?
Yes, well, as you said, we are assisting to the first experiences when it comes, for instance, to the green production of steel via hydrogen. So there are a few very interesting test cases, but the cost is still considerable. So we need to bring the cost down in order to make these procedures competitive and effective, and in order to roll this out on a mass scale. So that's where we are focusing now. These are still early days, but the interest is there, and I think we have the policy instruments so now in place. This will drive investment, and hopefully will bring us to relatively quick developments also in technology. So that's where the focus is now. Let's try to bring new technology and investment into the sector, which is a high emitter, and let's drive innovation towards a green production. The incentives in place should hopefully do in a sort that it doesn't take too long to have significant results.
On a different topic, you mentioned in your opening remarks that the use of coal and natural gas and also the new pipeline from Russia, the energy demand for the whole world has increased suddenly and very significantly. I think we are suddenly seeing demand for coal and natural gas increasing very rapidly in many regions of the world. How do you expect that Europe will be able to manage this energy transition? Do you think this is just a short-term issue and there are better solutions from a longer term in reducing the use of coal in the economy in Europe?
Well, what I can tell you is that most, if not all, coal mines in Europe, even today, are not competitive. And basically, they need subsidies to continue their production. So coal is definitely being phased out. May take a bit, and it will need adjustment measures, but it's out. The script is on the wall. The writing is on the wall. We need to manage a transition, obviously, and the transition will have to make do with a mix of solutions. There will be not one single recipe, but what is very encouraging is to see the spreading of renewables and the considerable reduction in prices. I mean, if you look at solar power, the evolution has been very rapid in terms of cost going down, be it in installation or be it in the power produced. Wind, in some European countries, you've got a dramatic transformation when it comes to the turbines required for wind power. I'm thinking about Denmark now, for instance, but there are a few other instances of offshore production. So there are encouraging signs, and they need to be fostered. And the way to foster them is to set clear targets. So that's where the Green Deal is so important, because the Green Deal is a major shift in the very paradigm of economic growth. So we don't want assets stranded into fossil fuels dominated sectors. We want to achieve growth by innovation, by driving technology towards renewables, towards the green transition. And I think we see already this happen.
Yes. Also, I think that many parts of Northern Europe have lots of forests and biodiversity and being used as a renewable resource. I think that option is not available in India. But do you see that growing more? That some of these nature-based solutions of growing more and more trees just for the purposes of using them as fuel and as building materials. Do you see that increasing? Is that also part of the Green Deal?
Well, look, what I can tell you is that the protection of biodiversity is integral to the Green Deal because these are actually twin objectives. Fight against climate change and biodiversity loss go together. So our goal to protect at least 30% of land and sea in Europe is part of our strategy to fight against climate change. Again, we do have some best practices, things to be imitated elsewhere. And I think that the COVID tragedy has been graphic evidence of the fact that biodiversity loss can no longer be ignored. I mean, in biodiversity, we also have an important international gathering taking place, COP15, which has been staggered divided into two sections now because of the epidemic. And biodiversity has not yet had its Paris moment, let's say. We don't have yet clear targets set. My hope is that we are going to get to that also when it comes to biodiversity and setting collective global targets. because the threats posed by biodiversity loss is I'm afraid, is equally relevant as the threat of climate change.
So, Ambassador, I think we have the last few minutes for our conversation. One area where the private sector on both sides can cooperate to a very large extent is on companies helping each other on achieving their net zero targets. I think that there are many companies in Europe, many companies in India who are all expressed their interest in moving to a net zero by 2050. I would say that one big area of cooperation would be for companies in verticals, in sectors, to cooperate with each other, to help each other to achieve this net zero target by 2050. How do we take that forward?
Well, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I understand in India, something is already moving in that respect. I mean, I hear that industrial organizations are looking to that and are trying to encourage this sort of vertical integration, quote unquote, in the sense of spreading green practices and green technologies. Well, it's something we need. We need it in Europe as we need it in India. Because if we want to achieve the objective of reducing emissions and keeping at bay the global warming, this must be a global endeavor, a collective endeavor. Each of us needs to play its part. The government needs to set the clear policy direction at central level. At state level, be it in India or in the EU, there needs to be a clear follow-up. Regional and local governments also need to do their part. And then the private sector needs to come up with the finance, with the ingenuity which is proper of the finance sector to find solutions for the green transition. And all of us individually are also stakeholders because we'll have to adapt our consumption patterns also. That's also part of the public discourse about climate change. And we need to accompany and support this paradigm shift in our economies. It's economic transformation, but it's also societal transformation. It's a global undertaking which is warranted because the risk is existential.
Yes, Ambassador. I think that's a very good thought on your part, and I think we have just a couple of minutes left before we close. And one of the big challenges, in industry, whether it's in India or the European Union, is that many of the large companies, are going to move rapidly in this way to paths to net zero. We really have to look at how we will take all parts of society, including the small and medium sector of industries and other suppliers with us. So in your concluding remarks, if you could talk about that and any other thoughts you have before we conclude.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Yes, I think you're right. Inevitably, large corporations are more apt at jumping on the opportunity, let's say. They can be more agile in shifting towards innovation. Small and medium enterprises need more help. As part of the Green Deal, we are trying also to provide the incentives and the finance for small and medium enterprise to follow. But it's also true that the panorama, the landscape of small and medium enterprise is very diverse. You've got a number of green startups, for instance. Well, these are also, after all, small enterprise. And very often they are not the followers, but the drivers of innovation. So I think, again, we need to put together the efforts in a cohesive and consistent manner. And we all have to drive towards the same objective. And if I have to conclude with a simpler couple of words, I think my words would be ambition and urgency.
Yes, yes, they are very important. Ambition and urgent. Yes, Ambassador. Thank you very much for being part of this series of discussions with the Ananta Center, and really a pleasure to talk to you and hear your views. Thank you very much, and good evening.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.